In 2007, my colleague, Dr. Kathy Whiteside, then Dean of Medicine, in her monthly or seasonal publication, Medicine, published an article called Thinking Critical. It says, MD students spearhead inaugural symposium. I quote, once a month, a dedicated group of MD students, physicians, and graduate students meet in the serene environs of Massey College to discuss the day's hottest topics in medicine and health sciences. Dean Whiteside was very supportive of Massey College, endorsing it philosophically and financially to get us going, and she was also involved in the LEAD project at the Faculty of Medicine to cultivate leadership in a med school of future medical leaders in the community. In that article, she published a wonderful picture here of the students that were involved. It's our good fortune that in conversations with Principal Orbinski that it would be nice to have a opportunity to interview these youngsters to find out what they were thinking at the time and how they got involved in Massey College and how suitable this would be to immortalize in Dialogues, which is a very interesting enterprise at Massey College which documents in historical fashion issues and discussions of the day. And it's my great privilege to let you know that Jay Shaw, Marty Betts, and Fiona Menzies are here, and Principal Orbinski has agreed to guide and lead the next session. And I should note that Jay has been very helpful in other regards and part of the organizing committee for this activity. And now I invite the principal to take charge and to continue with this process.
Thank you. Hello, that's good, okay. Thank you, Aubie. I will say, was it Kathy Whiteside who referred to Massey College as the serene environment?
Yes.
Well, obviously she doesn't know David Gold, because how could anything be serene in his presence? But anyway, you're always welcome, Dave. What I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about each of the founding MGR co-chairs. And as I introduce you, please come up. And I'm going to start with Jay. Jay Shaw, doctor, associate professor of psychiatry, and co-director of the Prevention and Early Intervention Program for Psychosis at McGill, focused on youth at McGill. And Jay, obviously, by virtue of that title, highly accomplished professional, runs an incredibly innovative program, and very much focused on prevention and early intervention for psychosis in adolescents and youth. He's a senior clinical scientist, received many awards, including the 2022 Research Excellence Award from the Schizophrenia International Research Society, and he was elected to the College of the Royal Society of Canada in 2024. Did his MD here at University of Toronto, and somewhere between or before his MD or after, he was at the London School of Economics as a Commonwealth Scholar. Come on up, Jay. Maybe just everybody just give him a welcome. And we also have joining us another MGR co-chair, and that's Martin Betts. And Martin is Executive Vice President, Medical at the Scarborough Health Network, and a founding co-chair of MGR. And that's in honor of his announcement at this point. And actually, Martin worked in critical care medicine. I don't know if you continue to do that. Yeah, critical care medicine specialist, so he's quite familiar with the auditory embellishments here. He's also very much, at least within the realm of medicine, clinical medicine, he truly embodies this idea of multidisciplinarity. He is committed to excellence, clinical excellence, innovation, and systems transformation, and has been working for the last number of years at Scarborough around from a multi-site perspective, it's not just one building, but looking at integrating healthcare system strategies, tools, technologies, processes across each of the sub-disciplines, if you will, of clinical medicine. And that's quite a feat. I mean, I think anyone who's familiar with the clinical practice of medicine in a complex hospital environment will very much appreciate the kind of mind that's required to see across those disciplines. And he worked in this, started doing this really around COVID, and was highly influential in analyzing hospital capacity and flow rates between departments, and making sure that we maximized critical care capacity, which is, again, I mean, I have some appreciation of how complex that is, and it's amazing. And he's also very much focused on beyond the institution itself, looking at how to build better healthcare in the broader Scarborough community. So come on up. And I will say Martin was a founding co-chair of Massey Grand Rounds, and I'll just read what it says here. He is committed to the principles of intellectual rigor, service, multidisciplinary inquiry, and health equity. And our third panelist is Fiona Menzies. Where's Fiona? Where? Oh, there you are. Okay. And Fiona is Chief of Geriatric Medicine at St. Joseph's Healthcare here in Toronto. And Fiona became a fellow here at Massey in 2006. She graduated medical school in 2008 from University of Toronto. And she did a residency at McMaster in community-based geriatric medicine. I know they have a particularly renowned program there in geriatric medicine. And she joined the St. Joe's Health Center and has been working as a geriatrician for the last 11 years at St. Joe's. And that program at St. Joe's has expanded under her leadership so that there's now a team, I think it's 4 or 5 people that are part of that team. Excuse me, she has 2 master's degrees, one from the University of Toronto in medical genetics, and the other in medical bioethics. She has a particular interest in helping geriatric patients, seniors, discern, she herself and her team discern whether or not they're capable of testifying, making power of attorney determinations, whether they're capable of instructing a lawyer appropriately, whether they're capable of administering property, making their own healthcare decisions, and so on. This is, as many of us will know in the room, those who are familiar with clinical medicine, these are very complex issues. They're not straightforward, and it requires truly a multidisciplinary perspective to be able to discern and to make good clinical judgments about these capacities. So if you want to come on up. So the Massey Grand Rounds, 20 years of history, 20 years of predictable success is how I would put it. I know in my own case, I would very much look forward to Massey Grand Rounds, and I would come especially for Massey Grand Rounds, sometimes not even knowing what the topic was, because I knew that no matter what, it was going to be interesting. There were going to be interesting people. They were going to ask highly provocative questions. They were going to be engaging in very meaningful ways. And it's really a pleasure to have 3 of the founding co-chairs. There are 22 in all, 10 of which are here, or 28, oh my gosh, They're multiplying. 28 in all, 10 of which are here today, and it's great to have 3 of our co-chairs on the panel. So I'm just going to start asking with a question to Jay. Tell us, Jay, about the early days, and were the early Massey Grand Rounds always as carefully managed and curated and wonderfully sort of presented with appropriate lighting and sound and makeup? You're wearing makeup, aren't you? Yeah.
Always.
Always, okay. What were the early Massey Grand Rounds like?
So, I should first acknowledge what a few others have said in the room, right? That really Aubie was a driving energy behind this whole thing right from the very beginning. And I don't exactly remember where at Massey I was. It was clearly at Massey, but where at Massey, here or some of the other rooms. We've been upstairs maybe? Yeah, Marty will remember. When we first met and connected around this. But I do recall Aubie making a really purposeful, intentional effort to bring a small group of us together to start thinking about doing something that spoke to this notion of a wider dialogue, a dialogue that wasn't just about clinical medicine, but touched on aspects of wider society. And that was one of a series of early discussions. Whether you're in a medical degree or a doctoral degree or a graduate school of some sort, you know how intense and all-consuming it can be. So it was really an opportunity to escape some of that for a moment and start thinking about some of these bigger issues. If I recall correctly, we were scrambling the first year in the sense that you're trying to figure it out as you go along. We'd had this idea, I think. Aubie had done an amazing job of scrounging up some funds. I don't remember exactly where. We had, on a lark, decided that we really wanted to do something, I wouldn't say controversial, but provocative. So I think we'd met and we talked a little about, should we invite a guest speaker, kind of a top-of-the-line speaker. And we landed upon the medical reporter for the New York Times, Dr. Lawrence Altman. If I recall correctly, what really got us onto this was he had published a piece in the Times a few months prior, which documented during some of his travels, he covered the Nobel Prize ceremonies. And during one of his travels, he had heard scuttlebutt in Scandinavia about a medical student who had been enrolled in medical school, I think at Uppsala. Thank you for the verification. Who it turned out had actually had a past where this individual had been a neo-Nazi. And we spent quite a while speaking about this. The article itself was incredible in its quite penetrating, but you can see immediately this connection between the practice and training of clinical medicine and implications for what it might mean for wider society and dialogue, right? So I think that even just the idea of having someone like that who has that story to tell come and talk to us really gets at it. So we invite him. He says he's interested. We're not quite sure if it's happening or not. I can't remember if he had trouble with the visa or there was some trip he was supposed to take for a publication you may have heard of called the New York Times. But it turned out that basically the night before we found out that he could make it, we somehow rushed to the airport to grab him. Like, we didn't want him to land and then turn around. Something else happened. And we had a wonderful, it was a captivating, riveting speech. We had a wonderful day with him. And so that was really the beginning of it all. But again, it sort of just unfolded by a bit of a lark, a bit of energy, a bit of idea making. So I think that gets at some of the pieces of this Massey thing that others have touched on in different ways.
And I have to ask a very personal question, how was Aubie through all of this?
So Aubie has this unique, you're asking me?
Yes.
So Aubie has this unique warmth, I would say, in which I feel like speaking to him sort of one-on-one here, but many of us have done this in the room, right? So, but Aubie has this unique warmth and sort of really genuine nature whereby he'll come and sit down next to us or across from us, and really just engage one-on-one in conversation. I would be remiss to not mention Esther Rose as well, who similarly is incredibly engaging. And very much made us, brought us into their home at times, really made us feel like family, which, as the earlier discussion was happening, I was trying to think about, there are lots of places that make connections. What's a bit unique about Massey is sort of the combination of the big and the small. There's the stuff outside the bigger world, but there's at times here what is achieved is this sense of intimacy. And that's what this really was and became. So I think that's very much part of the picture and certainly part of my recall and memory.
That's great. Martin, do you have any thoughts or early memories of the early days in your experience of the Grand Rounds?
Yeah, so I'll relate it to my experience joining Massey. So what's interesting is over coffee, I started to look around the room, and I think I know people in this room from maybe 7 domains of my life, going back to high school, to colleagues I have now. And so I remember my first experience in Toronto. It was almost, in fact, my medical school interview was the morning after the last time the Leafs won a playoff series. And you can imagine staying in a floor on Bay Street with hooligans honking their horns till 3 a.m. I wasn't going to sleep anyways. But, Toronto was a new experience for me. And Massey was a community. And a community to get to know not just, you can, as Jay highlighted, the rigor of all of our academic programs really demands a commitment and a focus, and your work can become pretty small. And Massey really opened up doors to me in disciplines and friendships and community that I didn't have. My further memory, and Jay sort of highlighted this in his remarks, that exploring tension. Our initial question was this tension between, or what got us to Lawrence Altman, this tension between this individual that had a past, that tried to reform himself, and now was committed to a greater social good, and put himself together with vulnerable populations. And so when I think about MGR and Massey, it was about not only bringing different thoughts together, different disciplines together, but it was also bringing tension into sort of conversations, creating space for open dialogue and exploring ideas, and having an outcome from that. And so when I think back to our original program related to the role of physicians in the world and healthcare training and its impact on the world of the future, and some of the conflicts that we have to navigate, or will have to navigate, it was developing that tension and a dialogue about really important conflicting ideas, and doing so in not only a respectful manner, but in a really inquisitive way. And that was my strong recollection from our first go-round.
And Fiona, what are your early memories of the confusion and kerfuffle of Massey Grand Rounds?
Massey Grand Rounds.
Be frank.
So I remember when we joined Massey, the medical students were actually in a minority. And it was very important for us to participate in the Massey community, but also give something back and sort of stake our claim as medical students that we were doing something for Massey College. I'd sort of forgotten about that until you guys started talking about it. But I think there was a critical mass. And there was more than just us. There was Janice as well. So I think that was, I think we were really proud of doing MGR because of that. And with Aubie's help, would not have happened without Aubie. So yeah, that's what I think I mainly take away from it. And also the multidisciplinary nature of Massey. Looking at the photographs, remembering everyone from there, and we're not all doctors now. Some of us are medical illustrators. So yeah, quite a lovely time, and a lovely time to think back to.
So one of the comments that had been made earlier on in the day was that the Massey community is many ways a self-selecting community, and also an intentional community in the sense that we do have, we do have an intention, and we do have criteria that we apply when we look for junior fellows and senior fellows and so on. So how much would you say, I guess if that's true, we create this kind of rarefied environment. Now, how has that experience shaped your career, or has it shaped your career? And how would you describe that influence?
I think, so as a geriatric medicine doctor, I love working in a multidisciplinary team. And I think if you look back way back from my medical school days in Massey College, it's that influence, like appreciating the input of others and not just necessarily in your specialty. I think that you could trace that line for me, I think. Don't know what these guys think.
What do you think, Brett?
I'll pass.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, is this on? Yeah. I think it's certainly true. It's also that at dinner, for example, you're sitting with people you may have never spoken with, all of whom I think, again, this is something I was thinking of during the earlier conversations, are kind of into three things, right? One, they like ideas. They like chewing on stuff, and not just food, but ideas and working through problems. And they also like people. It's actually really important, right? So those three ingredients really, with a crucible, the sort of figurative crucible, and different ideas intersecting from different walks of life certainly makes a big difference. I mean, I have my own personal experience here. I met my spouse here, right? I dislocated my shoulder here, as Marty will remember, while studying for a medical school exam. So there are lots of ways in which you really do come across people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, particularly at the point of grad school where there's a lot of straight and narrow happening otherwise.
Marty, do you want to give it a shot?
Of course. Dr. Goldblum highlighted this, but there's also, this generational diversity within Massey, and to have mentors like Aubie, I can think back to some of the activities of MGR, not just a symposia, but related to the Gairdner Foundation Awards and the breakfasts and lunches that sort of follow, because we had eminent scientists and researchers in the city and those experiences. I think I can speak for the three of us. We were all non-residents, if I can remember. That was sort of a distinction. And so it created a hub for us, I think, and a community for us locally, even though we weren't, part of the core group that was here for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so MGR created a bit of a stronger attachment, I think, for us. I used to joke that Master Fraser, am I allowed to call him Master Fraser? John Fraser. Let me into the college because I just was here so much. He was obliged to just collect some money from me because I was going to use the heat and hot water regardless. Linking back to my colleagues have suggested, it was access to, not access, but the relationships with senior fellows and quadranglers that have been durable relationships for a lot of us, and that was an opportunity that I think MGR allowed us to develop even further than it would have otherwise.
Now, for each of you, I said in my little preamble to the last question that in many ways it's a self-selecting community, right? So is it possible in your own examination of your career to date to say that you were already this way, I was born this way, multidisciplinary, inquiring, engaging, liking people, liking to puzzle with ideas, seeking some kind of even intermediate resolution of a conundrum? Is that something that you had a predisposition to that was then nurtured and kind of brought to a shine at Massey, or is that something that you could ascribe specifically, to Massey?
I think it is self-selecting. I think the older I get, the more I realize I am who I am. Esther Rose met me, and within 2 minutes, I was like, you haven't changed at all. So I think it did polish facets of my personality or inclinations, which was very beneficial for my career. But I think the core pieces were there. I don't know what you guys think.
Marty?
So it's difficult for me to deny that it's a self-selecting group when I started by saying I know people from 7 walks of life in this room for me. So with that inability to deny that, I don't think I think I really developed that at Massey. I don't think it was something I was oriented towards to begin with. I had done a very pragmatic degree at the University of Victoria. I'd worked in industry for a couple of years. I come from a household of 2 teachers. Certainly service was a big component, I think, of what my nature was and orientation was. And so I think Massey truly opened up that inquiry component to me. It opened up to me certainly the, and I don't think it was obvious at the time, but just the nature of having different people from somewhat different walks of life, certainly different orientations towards what their future and their careers were going to be. And I actually think Massey opened those doors and opened those ideas within me that existed somewhere but actually weren't developed to the degree that it would have, and certainly wouldn't come out of the traditional curriculum I would have been exposed to at U of T.
And Jay, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would think that there's got to be some version of potentiality there. What I would point to, though, is that Massey is the kind of place that's been able to take folks who have different types of potential within them, and help them leverage that or develop it in all sorts of different ways. Right? Marty, you went on to do an MBA. I had a bit of a background in sort of health policy prior to coming to medical school, and I wanted to make sure I didn't drop the first in pursuit of the second. So Massey allowed me to really be able to continue kind of holding both, not necessarily in opposition, but in duality. And I think that was really, really important for me. So, and Fiona, you've described that too. So there are ways in which, I think there's probably got to be some interest there in the sense that, and that's the self-selection that you're speaking to, but there's got to be enough diversity within Massey to be able to take that further in all sorts of different ways. I suspect it. Trust the psychiatrist, right, to say it's a bit of both. So
Multifactorial.
yeah.
So if we think about the future, I'd like you each to think about this. How do you think Massey College itself, but also even more specifically Massey Grand Rounds, can be improved so that it makes even more substantial contribution to the future? And I think for each of you, you've obviously you've had the experience of being a co-chair some years ago, and you've had some significant career experience, and each of you have gone on to really major leadership positions, and each of you, demonstrably, based on the bios that I shared with you, have innovated and have changed things at your home institution. Is that something that's important? Is the idea of innovation, the idea of creative generation, is that an idea that is important to the experience of Massey Grand Rounds? Or is Massey Grand Rounds for it in the future? Is it something that should be kind of spontaneously, sort of generational of ideas, as it sounds like was the case for you, Jay? Should there be a more explicit intentionality in terms of areas of focus, for example? So there's about 3 or 4 different questions in there. But the first one is, how do you think about the future for Massey Grand Rounds? And please reflect on that in terms of your, first of all, experience of it, and then also your career experience. If you wanna.
Yeah, so okay, there's a lot of questions there. I think for me, for the future, I can't keep thinking. This has really made me think about how we started MGR, and I never thought it would be still going. I don't even think I thought about 20 years from when we first started it. Like, what would it be? So I'm like so excited that it's still going, and I think some of it has to come from the people the current fellows, what they see and what they are excited about, and what can inspire them and their colleagues. But I also think I'd like us to have the legacy of being a disruptor, like something provocative, like Jay was saying. I like that idea, and I like the idea that as a piece, Massey as part of U of T, what can we do for the wider U of T community? I think it's giving us relevancy. Yeah.
Marty?
I think that 20 years of Massey Grand Rounds speaks for itself in terms of its ability to endure and to generate interest, to generate a collective to come together. I think as we look to the future with 28 co-chairs that have now gone off to the world and in all domains really flourished, that's a real opportunity, I think, for MGR to continue to broaden its network. And for me, it was really cool to come home to Massey. We don't have opportunities as often anymore. And so to see friends and to discuss these ideas, just like we did 20 years ago, I think is really neat. And in terms of how it's structured, as Jay highlighted, as a co-chair group, it was sort of conversation, interests, ideas that developed naturally from just the environment that got us to where we had our symposia. And not that I've been heavily involved in over the last 18 years, but I know individual co-chairs have developed their own ideas and taken it where they've wanted to. And I think that, as the world adapts, and I think it helps move the college forward, it helps move the ideas forward, and it helps people develop ideas and interests. And it was neat because it was, at the time, our thoughts were directly related to where we were in life, but projecting forward on what we were going to do with our lives and what it meant for our colleagues that were going through the same circumstances. And I think that was cool, and I think that's how I'd keep it.
That's great. Before I ask Jay, I would just ask people, anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question, maybe just ready your thoughts, and I'll let Jay give his reflections, and then I'll invite you to questions.
Yeah, so I think there needs to be some spontaneity or some element of that just to keep it fresh and relevant. But I will say that this sort of tension at the core of what Aubie touched on, 20 years ago, this desire to think beyond the confines of one's clinical practice and training and the connections to wider society and implications for that will not, that will forever be a tension at the heart of medicine and healthcare more generally. So, there's lots of room for spontaneity while still maintaining that kind of main thread throughout over time. If I can, I'll also reflect on this from my perspective outside of U of T, right? So here you have Massey, right? You have Massey as a gathering place for these kinds of conversations, and there are others. At other universities, there's nothing like Massey, maybe with the exception of Green College at UBC, right. But outside of that, these are few and far between. And so if I could maybe put a single vote maybe, but a vote nonetheless, for thinking a little bit about the wishes of graduate students and trainees elsewhere, sort of across Canada, who are similarly enamored with and sort of thoughtful about these sorts of tensions. I think it would be really nice to see if there are ways to use this as a seed for something sort of that could grow elsewhere too, because these tensions certainly come up. I think all of us who, when we talk with trainees of all stripes, whether they're undergraduates or graduates, we see these at the heart of a lot of the conversations that you have sort of offline, right? But they're incredibly meaningful and sustaining to know that others care about them.
Excellent. Please, sir, go ahead. Just introduce yourself. Do you have a microphone here? Here, let me come up to you. Just,
and I'm a former employee of Global Affairs Canada. I came to Canada 15 years ago. And my question is, first, due regards to Dr. Bunting, just 100 years ago, he he invented the insulin hormone here. And maybe after 100 years, if some scientist here in Toronto discover something which is through which we could permanently get rid of diabetes, and that might obviously lead to $1 billion or $1 trillion startup company. But before that, my question is, does Canada have, or does the government of Canada has appropriate safeguards or sufficient safeguards to protect the intellectual property and the rights of that prospective investor or inventor to protect his intellectual property? Thank you.
excellent. Thank you. Marty.
I'll talk. So in my community in Scarborough, we're 650,000 members of our community. We have over 100,000 that have diabetes. So it is a huge burden on my hospital system in particular. We also have over 125,000 people that don't have access to primary care. And so our way of trying to tackle that challenge is through innovating new models of primary care. I was in discussions yesterday about developing a center of excellence in diabetes care because we recognize that for our community in particular, it is such a huge need, and it's a need that's our patients have not had access to. Bringing up innovative medicines. As many would know, Dr. Dent Drucker helped invent GLPs, and he's done quite well, from what I understand. But you speak to one of the challenges, and I know Dan and I have had sort of been involved in some conversations like this, how in Canada can we take an idea from a research hub in blocks from this, where we're sitting right now, that has the potential to transform the world? How is it developed to help patients in our community that really represent the world? You can go to Scarborough and you can see someone from all corners of the earth, genetic diversity that doesn't exist really in any other community outside of Canada. It's a really interesting challenge, and I think it's forums like this that can help us put ideas out there and get together and drive ideas and innovations. And my small piece is at the end user and the clinical practice, but recognize how a partnership that we're looking to develop with pharmaceutical manufacturers will help us get access and help our patients try and achieve that. And so that's my piece, and the ideas that MGR has helped develop, I think, are some of the ideas that we're using to apply and help solve these problems.
Jay, any comment on that question?
Yeah, it's hard to top that answer. I think that was extremely, you really touched on a number of things there, Marty. I think maybe the bit I would add is that innovation comes in all sorts of different forms. I think you, Marty, alluded to this a little bit. Sometimes it's about intellectual property that can be protected, and there may be a case for that, right? But part of the story with insulin was that it was, allowed to all sorts of folks to use, right? So there are other forms of innovation that would include things like designing and developing new service models and making the knowledge of those available, and the implications of that, and thinking about designing systems that deliver better care. So the only piece I think I would like to add to what Marty said is that there are many ways in which innovation can happen. Developing sort of new treatments is one of those, and even that happens in all sorts of different forms.
Fiona?
So I think the protection of intellectual property is going to be a challenge for us as a world moving forward. If you look at the advent of AI, this is becoming even more pertinent. With respect to medical innovations, I hope it wouldn't hold people back from still trying to work on that kind of work and make a difference. As Marty says, certainly my patients, if you have someone with dementia and on insulin, it's a bit of a disaster. Like a cure for insulin, a cure for diabetes would make a tremendous difference in so many people's lives. So I hope, there's so many barriers to actually creating and coming up with solutions. But I hope I hope no one's seeing that as a major barrier for going into that kind of work.
Yeah, the other aspect I would just add to that is that protection of intellectual property rights across borders requires a rules-based international order. And it requires respect for the World Trade Organization and its regulatory architecture and structure. Most of that has just gone out the window in the last 80 days. So I would be a strong proponent of the position that each of you have taken, that innovation takes many forms, and only some of it can be commodified or classified as intellectual property. But I do take your point that, to the extent that there is appropriate and rigorous protection of intellectual property where that's possible, we should certainly do it, in my view. And you had a question, sir. I feel like Donahue or something, getting up and...
Thank you. I'm an alum from the basically first decade, of Massey. I was on the activist type. So let me set the context before the questions I asked. I was an activist type on the House Committee, which fought for successfully admission of women here. Then later on, I was the founding director of the Alumni Association, raised $250,000 for this, and I've been until early 90s. For us, the original, it was, this book was not discussed that this was a community and that it basically was interdisciplinary. My question is that what changed from the early 90s to this foundation MGR that it was needed, MGR kind of program was needed? Frankly speaking, for the last 20 years, although I live in walking distance from here, I've been away from, mostly away, so I wasn't aware of this. I'm glad that tell us what was the second thing is that personally, obviously you stressed community and interdisciplinary, and you obviously admit that Massey College changed you. So my question is that in your profession, those changes, what new programs, the new directions you were able to go towards after your Massey experience in medical profession?
Excellent. Thank you. Who wants to give that a shot? Fiona?
I didn't quite catch your first question. I'm so sorry.
Understood. We never asked a question that, this is a community and the interdisciplinary, it'll help us. Somehow it never came to us. And obviously this become very important that I was saying what changes in Canada or Massey College took place between late 80s and that a special program for MGR was required, that this has to be reinforced. This question of interdisciplinary. Has something happened at Massey College where this program had been diluted? And the second question, of course, is that what, after that you benefited, what changes have you noticed in your profession?
Thank you, and thank you for allowing women to activate for that. It was greatly appreciated by me and my colleagues who are women. Gosh, it's really interesting because I do think by the time I joined Massey, it had become siloed a little bit. I came from a background in basic science from medical genetics, and we really didn't have much interaction with any discipline other than our core department. So that was part of the attraction for me to go to Massey. So I think that was still part of the ethos of Massey. But I do remember, as I said, I do remember it was important to represent the medical school as fellows. But I think, not to the detriment of the rest. To sort of, you can think of it as like a tapestry, as one major thread in that tapestry. creating, something from all of the disciplines. I think, what have I gained from Massey? I don't know. It's who I am now. It's like part of the building blocks that has got me where I am now. So it's hard to tease that out and say exactly what from Massey College, at least for me, it's hard for me to tease out exactly what it was. But if I had to say one thing, I think maybe confidence. I think Aubie's mentorship, that you trusted us and me. You knew I could contribute something. It's very appreciated.
Marty?
I think others could speak to Massey's history better than I can, but I'll just say, this place was going to be overrun with law students, I think, if someone didn't step in and say, we need to sort of have 3 domains of, the arts, the social sciences, and the harder sciences. And I think to MGR's credit, speaking to this forum, is we didn't restrict ourselves to just the life sciences and the hard sciences in developing our ideas. We recognize the value, just our prior comments on intellectual property and how that impacts the work of the health and life sciences. So that's how I'd sort of answer the first part of the question. For me, in fact, I have a very specific experience that I can recall and how it impacted my career. And that was a conversation with one of our senior fellows who posed me the question of, how will you know you're providing quality care to your patients? And that's actually been a question that has, I would say, driven my career over the last 12 years in medical practice and through my residency in well. And it's spurred my interest in quality of care. It identified that I had a responsibility as a clinician to demonstrate to my patients, and they had a right to understand the type of care I was going to provide to them. So it led to sort of almost a graduate degree, and really drove the initial part of my career with a real keen emphasis on quality of care, and developed a number of programs that have inspired me, I would say, from that particular conversation that I won't forget.
Yeah, just sort of very quick. So I grew up outside the Toronto area, right? So I grew up in Western Canada. So my exposure to Massey before arriving in Toronto was actually the Massey lectures, right? And if we think about especially the Massey lectures in the 80s and 90s, those covered a whole range of things, all from biomedicine all the way to sort of critical theory and so on. So there was you think about Ursula Franklin's lecture, which is deeply interdisciplinary, and so I'm not so sure that something changed in the nature of Massey, but these things do maybe work a little bit by word of mouth, because if there has been a tradition of folks from the health sciences who have been at the college for a while, others will join, but if that somehow kind of falls away for no particular reason, then it's harder to revive that. So I think, I don't want to speak for Aubie, but certainly there was clearly a desire to make sure that there was a gathering place within Massey at that time, because there didn't seem to be another one for the health sciences students at Massey. So there was that desire to just have a place where we could chat and throw ideas against the wall and see what sticks or stuck. So I think that piece. And then to your second question, I think the first answer to that would be relationships. It's been touched on a lot. I met Dr. Goldblum here for the first time, and we still continue to dialogue, right? So he, before a trip recently, he had contacted me, and we'd shared some information that he could hopefully use in his trip. So there's that relationship. I'm sorry? Without citation. Thank you, Dr. Goldblum. But also there's a word that's coming to mind, which is a little bit of, I hope this doesn't sound too much horn-tooting, but there's an audacity that can sometimes come from the intimacy that I described earlier, that you can share some idea that is half-baked, but someone's willing to hear it out because there's probably a kernel of something really neat in it, right? And it makes you a little bit less afraid to try that out down the line and down the line and down the line again. And so in ways that I probably can't describe one particular example of that, there's a sense in which there's a permission structure created to be able to share thoughts that you might not otherwise have done. So that to me has been really valuable.
Aubie, I'd like to ask you the same question. Maybe I'll formulate it slightly differently. What, in your experience, led to the creation of MGR, Massey Grand Rounds?
Well, that's a wonderful question, because there's background. of interest and novelty. And of course, it harks back to my own personal experience as to what I observed and enjoyed and tried to perpetuate. And it harks back to my own experience as a medical student and my mentors that I both admired and tried to emulate. And if you add back the roots of my own interest and confidence in what we all did, it goes back to my medical school days where I was exposed to stars like Dr. Joseph Dopin, physiology at the University of Manitoba, Charles Hollenberg as chair of medicine at McGill University, Henry Friesen, who are common colleagues with a Manitoba background, which coalesced here with John Dirks and I coming to Massey College, both with experience as clinician scientists growing up in an environment that encouraged inquiry, but also experiences where our own mentors had sufficient confidence in our own experience and talents to transfer responsibility to make decisions. So if you look back at your own experience, I think what you experienced was the crowd offered the opportunity for you to exercise your thoughts and ideas and gave you a responsibility to self-manage, because the bulk of the work was done by you. The ideas may have been brought forward, but there was sufficient confidence in the environment in which you felt you were working with peers. So the senior fellowship here was a peer acceptance and a peer approval process that allowed you to do what you wanted to do because you had the natural talents and interests and courage to carry on. So that's a background that I think is not well understood by all, that allowed this to flourish as it did, because it was John Fraser who thought, hey, gee, this is a terrific idea, and this place was over-lawyered. The social sciences was dominant, and medical students, health science students were here sparingly, and they were kind of wandering around. And they were interested in Near Eastern studies, but there was no forum and opportunity for them to enjoy each other in a non-threatening, non-competitive environment, but to explore relationships with peers at a senior level. That's in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, that's great.
What's
That's
background.
great. I would just encourage others, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. But I'm going to just pose another question to the panel. When we just reflect on what all of you have now contributed in terms of the answer to this question, it seems to me that Massey does respond to changing patterns, to changing issues in culture and economics and in politics. It responds to issues of contemporary concern, but it does it from a very particular perspective, and it's most valuable when that perspective is multidisciplinary. Now, it hasn't, even now, this year, with this year's group of resident junior fellows, most especially, there's not a lot of health sciences people. And now there's some, obviously, but we are making a concerted effort for next year to increase those numbers. My sense, and I'd just love to get your reflection on this, and most especially Aubie and David too, as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. My sense is that a focus on the clinical aspects and or the practical aspects of health sciences actually brings a pragmatism to the ethereal, sometimes, reflections that are, both in the arts and in humanities and in the social sciences that are very important. I'm not in any way minimizing them. But the presence of a set of practical, clinically oriented, service-oriented, even healthcare technology-oriented, we would need drugs, therapeutics, vaccines, devices that improve healthcare systems. That pragmatism actually demands a better and multidisciplinary perspective, but also gives the college and the broader community a focus, right? That it's not simply about perpetual inquiry; it's about critical problem solving. Does that resonate with you? And David, I'd also like your thoughts on that.
You touch on a very important and subtle issue, and that is the transition from a naive graduate student to a mature, experienced, and practitioner who has self-confidence and competence to carry on a mission into society. Massey is at the transition interval where the individual students' needs are served for their own personal development to bring to the point where they can take on questions, fundamental questions of both service, philosophy, attitude, and obligation to society. It's very difficult for a naive, newborn, entry-level individual to assume a responsibility in society and automatically work for the public good if they don't know what they're delivering. So there is a transitional interval during the first 2 or 3 years of graduate studies to acquire both the lexicon, the vocabulary, responsibility, and authority to go to the next step, which is to serve in the public good. It's difficult serving the public good if you don't know what, if you don't understand.
You don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah. David, any thoughts?
A couple of thoughts. First, there is the sort of romantic notion of discovering things on your own or not seeing the larger texture of the canvas that you're working in that I think Massey is a great antidote to. And I speak to as somebody who wishes he had been a junior fellow at Massey for the experience. I mean, I had it as a senior fellow, but when I went off to my undergraduate education, my physician father gave me the only career advice he'd ever given me. He said, if you're even thinking of applying to medical school, don't study science as an undergraduate. It's your last chance to learn about the world. And I followed his advice. Now, that was okay for the 1970s, but in the hyper-competitive world of getting into medical school now, I don't think that freedom exists in the same way, which makes Massey even more of an oasis as people become subspecialized in their pursuits at an earlier and earlier age. This is the antithesis. This is the chance to take off your blinders and see the world. So I just think it's a great environment for that purpose.
It's wonderful. Peter, do you have any thoughts on this? You've certainly played a major role over the life of the
Yes,
college.
I was reflecting on all the different questions. The thing that has struck me the most in my involvement with Massey Grand Rounds are the dinners that we've been having monthly, where the guest is a eminent scientist, professor, and the students, I think, have all benefited from the ability to learn about career development and the things that would really work for them. So that's kind of my reflection on this. It's a fascinating topic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Well, I would just like to offer each of the panelists an opportunity to give a final reflection. Are you ready?
This has been quite lovely. It's really nice to think back to when we were doing MGR. And it's also, it sort of inspired me to have a think about, I'm at a 12-year mark coming up for my career. What do I want to do for the future? And it's kind of nice to think back to what I was thinking when I was doing MGR and what I would do. It's been a really lovely afternoon so far.
So I'm going through a career transition at the moment as sort of taking a modest step back from clinical medicine, which has driven my my focus for 20 years now. And so the opportunity when Aubie reached out 6 weeks ago to say we want to talk about 20 years of MGR, to reflect back on that and sort of the elements that Dr. Goldblum highlighted are the things that came to me. How this was my opportunity to develop other areas of my personality, other areas during, it was a really challenging time, and how some of the lessons that, maybe skills I didn't appreciate I was developing in that moment, I'm actually relying on and developing further and building, and it's, you know, having a forum like this to take an afternoon off and reflect on it, or an evening when sort of Aubie threw out some questions about what to think about, are just some small milestones to think about where things have developed and got me to, and where they're going to go. So thanks for the opportunity.
Jay.
Yeah, so I guess the three of us are in this unique position, right, of being old enough to reflect on the good old days, but young enough that we can still talk about sort of career transitions and stages. I guess what I would, and I'm undergoing the same thing, right? I'm sort of thinking about, you know, shifts or what comes next or whatever. And it made me reflect that when you're in the throes of training, it really does feel like you're doing what you're going to be doing for until the end of time. But the truth is that there are always going to be moments where you can take a step in that direction or shift course or whatever. So I guess I would say something that seems a little bit trite, but, you know, stay curious. Don't be afraid to sort of cut across the silos, because there will be opportunities to do that. Keep those interests sort of alive, and Massey will have inculcated them.
Thank you. And Aubie, do you want to offer some final thought or reflection on this particular panel?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. My view is that we have here a collective of leaders who have experienced and expressed the basis of their personal evolution and career trajectory. And my hope is that that experience will translate into their own personal performance and carry this experience forward and amplify it in your interactions with the students that you mentor, because all of you mentor students. You've been preconditioned, you've demonstrated the experience so far, and you are in a great position to recruit in a like-minded way, like the old days when we had apprentice physicians to doctor surgeons. But in the context of knowledge development and the future, you're in a very powerful position, occupying responsibilities that allow you to do that. And I hope the experience in Massey Grand Rounds, both in the past and in the future, creates the desire to transfer that onto the younger generation that you will be exposed to. That's the only comment.
Well, that's wonderful. I will say, as principal of the college now, listening to this really wonderful dialogue and the very beautiful reflections that people have had, I've acquired a kind of the gift of language, of giving a form and word to some of the things that I have felt that are very important for Massey. And some of the reasons that, because of my feelings, I decided to pursue the role. But what I've heard here is a really beautiful language and a nice kind of lexicon of words that I can use, I can draw on to better describe what has thus far been intangible and almost indescribable for me as a member of the community. So thank you each, Fiona, Marty, Jay, for really, really beautiful reflections, for taking the time to think about this beforehand, which obviously you did, and for sharing so openly, so graciously, and with such a spirit of curiosity, which I think is kind of the essence of what both Massey Grand Rounds and Massey itself is. So thank you. A big round of applause for And now you each get a little prize, and it's something that you will, I'm sure, appreciate. You just wait your turn.
I was pointing to him.
Here you go. Pin for you, Jay. And also for you, Fiona. A little tiny pin for your shirt. Well, thank you each very much, and we'll see you at dinner. Okay, excellent.